1300 AM.
Welcome back to the Runaround, brought to you by Halliburton Sports here on ESPN 1300 AM. If you want great customer service for all of your running needs, check them out, HalliburtonSports.com. Once again, that's Halliburton Sports. I'm your co-host, Greg Jubb, alongside Brad Jager and Ryan McGrath here in the booth. And welcome to our featured segment of Around the Clock, presented by Running Times, the magazine for the dedicated runner. You can visit them online at runningtimes.com. Running Times senior editor Scott Douglas is joining us for today's segment, and we're going to talk about the upcoming U.S. Olympic trials. Scott, you're on the Runaround. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So we already have the U.S. Marathon trials in the books a couple months ago, so we know what the team is. We got Meb Keflezighi, Ryan Hall, and Abdi Rahman representing the men's team. What do you think of that team right there?
I think it's a really good team. I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the games, given what we've seen of them so far in their build-up races to the games. They all ran a 10K in New York a couple weeks ago, and Meb and Abdi ran great. Ryan Hall ran incredibly horribly, and yet I would guess that at the Olympics he'll be the first American finisher. He sort of, his pre-marathon races seem to have nothing to do with how well he does in the marathon, so it'll be interesting to watch.
Now, Scott, do you, for the listeners, the London course, a lot of people ask about the course for the marathons, and of course they do it so that they're spectator friendly. It's a loop course. It has a number of turns.
Right.
Do you think, perhaps a taller, longer stride runner like Ryan Hall is maybe at a little bit of a disadvantage, when you're talking about making turns, technical courses? Does that play into favor for a particular runner?
I don't think his height would be the issue. I think it's just more what kind of runner does well on more of a sort of cross-country type tactical race, and which is sort of similar to how they ran the trials race, the trials course in Houston. Had a lot of turns. There was a 180 that did 3 times. And
now, with a guy like Ryan Hall, when I think of Ryan Hall, I think of that 204 he ran at Boston. That is the Ryan Hall in peak shape from what I remember. Do you think he could get into that kind of shape or better going into London, especially after that 10K that he kind of bombed?
Sure. I would count that 204 as a bit of an anomaly because everyone ran about 2 or 3 minutes fast.
Of course,
because of that tailwind.
Yeah, so it's still a phenomenal performance, obviously, 207-ish, without the wind maybe. It's impossible to say because his build-up races are so out of whack with his marathons. Most people you could see their build-up races and see, okay, yeah, he or she's in good shape and is training well. Ryan, a month before that 204, he ran like a 103 half marathon
at New York, right?
Yeah. So you just never know. I can't think of a runner who's the difference between their build-up races and marathons is that great.
Right, because you'd have to assume, for a runner like Ryan Hall, who's broken an hour for a half marathon, a 103 is not even quite training pace.
Right.
You'd have to assume, and especially considering he has run the 20 whatever he ran at London a few years back. I guess it was 206 or something.
Right. So he ran low 206 there, and that's about 30 minutes a 10K for each 10K, and that's what he ran in this race in New York a couple weeks ago for 10K. So it's very odd.
And what about there's a lot of talk and attention, obviously, and somewhat rightfully so, on Ryan Hall. But you look at the age of this team. There's some they're up there in their years, but Meb Keflezighi seems to he's recording PRs. Even if it's just by a handful of seconds at New York Marathon in the fall. And wins trials. And
he beat Ryan Hall head to head.
Yes, Meb. So Meb got dropped by Nike a couple years ago, and I think he's been on fire ever since. Sort of he seems to be racing almost out of spite, and he's been amazing. He runs for Skechers now. The only elite runner to run for Skechers.
Of course, Skechers now with a $40 million lawsuit going on.
Yeah. But yeah, on the men's side, it's an old team, and but on a course like that, experience could help.
Right. On a course like that with so many turns and a loop course, going out hard and just running all out for the first part of the race doesn't really give you an advantage. It'll probably keep the pack tighter together And the older, smarter runners probably have a little bit more of a advantage at this type of course.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to go out really, really fast. Like in Beijing, it went out very fast from the start. Sammy Wanjiro went out, dared everyone to stay with him. I don't think that would happen on a course like London. I think what will happen is something more like what you've seen in the last couple of World Championships, where it's it's fairly conservative first half, and then somebody runs just an insanely fast 5K from say 25 to 30K. Maybe like 14, 15 for 5K, and that'll be this like big sustained push that'll probably define the race. So at halfway, I think our team would still be in there probably.
And the bottom line with Meb is he's your 2004 Olympic silver medalist.
Yeah.
So not only is he experienced, he's got some hardware from the Olympics. But
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I think the biggest thing we have to admit here is that the Kenyan and Ethiopian teams are probably the strongest they've ever been.
Right.
So what are the chances, Scott, do you think that an American could possibly sneak into the medal podium?
Well, the Kenyan teams were pretty strong in 2004 too. Where just this isn't like a big city marathon where you've got 10 Kenyans pushing the pace from the start. Like we've said, it's more of a tactical race. So although the Kenyan and the Ethiopian teams have amazing athletes on them, especially the Ethiopian team, they're all based on who's run fast this year, which they did at very flat, fast courses, Dubai and Rotterdam, and that might not be as relevant at the London Games as it might be at the regular London Marathon, which is a very flat, fast course.
So competition nonetheless is high. And moving on to the women, we have Shalane Flanagan, Desi Davila, and Kara Goucher for our top three, representing the United States at London. What do you think of the three women there?
That's an amazing team. That is definitely the best women's marathon team that we've sent. I could definitely see Shalane Flanagan medaling. She medaled in the 10K at the last Olympics. I think if any of those three will medal, it would be Shalane Flanagan. She always seems to rise to the level of competition that she's at.
Right, and we talked about Ryan Hall having a disparity between his tune-up races and what he races on the big stage. Right. Shalane Flanagan, on the other hand, has not been like that this year.
But she's never like that. I don't think she ever runs a bad race. Yeah, she's just every race she runs is great, and every race that she's running now is while in the midst of heavy marathon training. So it sort of makes her performances all that more impressive.
Right, and runners like Shalane Flanagan and Kara Goucher are runners who were 5K, 10K runners that slowly, incrementally get stronger and move their way up to the marathon distance. Do you think they're at a point in their career where the marathon would be their prime event?
I know that for now they're focusing definitely on London. Like we might see them in the 10,000 meters at the Olympic trials, and so Shalane Flanagan may very well win that race, but that would be as part of her preparation for the marathon. I don't think for now that she's sort of trying to straddle two worlds.
Right, now, Scott, let's move on to the actual track events, which are coming up in late June, early July. So they're actually upon us. And I keep forgetting every time we talk about the Olympic trials, they really only are a little bit more than a month away. So it really is time to start seeing who's got the A standard and who's got the chops to get the top three at these events. The 5K for the men, I think it goes without saying Bernard Lagat is one of the favorites just because of his kick. And 13:07 at the Millrose Games this indoor season. But there's some guys behind him that I think can make a run for it. Lopez Lamong, for example, 13:11 at Stanford, and now he's got a 1:46 to his name. We were talking about this in our race recap in the first block. What do you think of guys that could actually get top three in the men's 5K?
Right. So Galen Rupp, who has the American record at 10K, he almost certainly would double back and try to make the team in the 5K as well. So I think that everyone's going to be thinking those two guys are locks, unless something horrible happens. So then you've got there are at this point 6 other guys beyond those two who have the Olympic A standard. And just to real briefly explain, if you don't have the Olympic A standard, then even if you finish in the top 3 at the Olympic trials, you don't get to go to the Olympics. Right,
you're not going.
So then there's 6 guys who have the Olympic A standard, not named Bernard Lagat and Galen Rupp, and there's a lot some of those guys also have the 10K standard, and so there's going to be a lot of chess moves, seeing who's going to run what event, because they're going to think, well, there's one spot probably available in the 5K. Should I take my chances in that, which is at the end of the meet, or should I run the 10K, which is the first night of the meet, see if I can make the team there? But then, of course, if you don't make the team in the 10K, then you enter the 5K with very tired and beat-up legs from having run the 10K. So Lopez Lemong has not clarified whether he is focusing on the 5K or the 1500, in which he was an Olympian at the last Olympics. And he wouldn't be able to do a double because the schedule at the trials has a heat of one on the same day as the final of the other. So if he were to say, I'm definitely doing the 5K, I would go with him because he can close fast, as is often the case in what's needed to make the team at a race like that.
I think any of the three names of the guys we mentioned are probably going to be able to close fast. Galen Rupp just put his name on the map as a miler this past weekend. 3:34. I did not know he had that in him. He said he ran 3:39 in college.
Yeah.
A humongous PR. That's a 3:51 mile. I didn't know he had that kind of speed. Now, these I don't want to look too much further past than the Olympic trials, but assuming he's a lock on the team, I'd love to say that we'd have an American who's looking to at least go top 5 and maybe sneak into that medal podium, because that's the speed it takes. You watch any of the Olympic 5Ks or 10Ks, they're going to get closed in about a 53-second last lap.
Right.
And maybe even a 155, something like that, even down to 152 for the last 800. I mean, it's incredibly fast. It's a long tempo before that, and then it's a humongous push. Whoever takes that lead with the 2 laps to go or 1,000 meters to go, that's when the race really begins. And I think he's showing that he's got the speed to finally not only move with the pack into the last stages of the race, but move up to the front with the top guys from Ethiopia or Kenya. What do you think?
Yeah, I would at 10,000 meters, yes, in the Olympics, I would agree with that. Probably not at 5,000. That's probably getting a little too fast for him. But at 10,000 meters, it's exactly what he and his coach Albert Rosales are. That's why they're doing all this stuff. For 2 years, they've been having him run a lot of short stuff. He even ran an indoor 800 last year to work on this closing speed.
And Scott, let me ask you this. Bernard Lagat, I mean, I'm sure you saw the 5,000 in Daegu this past summer.
Yeah.
I always think he kicks too late. And let's face it, he's not a spring chicken anymore. His mile speed is still good, but not maybe quite where he used to be. Do you think he still has it in him to make a move that's going to surpass something to that of Mo Farah's?
I can definitely see Bernard Lagat medaling. I mean, whether that's gold or not, it's so dependent on how much people, what happens in that last 100. I guess I would disagree. I think that he is among the best tacticians that I've ever seen. He, instead of moving too late, I mean, maybe now he just sort of doesn't realize he's not as quick as he used to be, which would, I guess, be your point. But I think he's just amazing he's always in the right place at the right time.
He somehow manages to get out of the box. I will give him that.
He does. He's always like trapped with 250 to go, and then all of a sudden, the Red Sea is parted, and he just goes right through. It's amazing.
And let's talk about the women here. What do you think of the women going into the 5,000 meter, 10,000 meter?
Okay,
for the trials?
So the 10,000 women trials is very interesting because at this point there are 8 women who have the Olympic A standard. 3 of them are the women on the Olympic marathon team. So even if all 3 of those were to run the trials, which I think at least Shalane Flanagan and Desiree DeVille will, and they may very well place in the top 3, they won't run that event in the Olympics. And so the other women in the race who have the A standard will can be thinking like, oh, I'm in 5th place. I still have a shot to make the team. I think of the non-marathoners, the top would be Amy Hastings, who was 4th at the marathon trials. It's very interesting on the women's side, there's a lot of overlap between the marathon trials results and the 5 and 10,000 list, whereas on the men's side, there's almost no overlap. There's the marathoners and the track guys, but in the women, there's the top women are the top marathoners. So in the women's 10,000, I would say Amy Hastings will be the top non-Olympic marathoner finisher. She's really stepped it up in the last couple years and was 4th at the Olympic trials. So you have to say that she's really hungry to do whatever it takes to make the team. Right. 5,000 is a lot more open for the women, although it's interesting, Shalane Flanagan has the fastest qualifying time, but there's a lot of more track-oriented people. Lauren Fleshman, who made the final of the World Championships last year, is in that race, but she's been hurt, so it's hard to say. Julia Lucas, just improved her PR by about 25 seconds a couple of weeks ago, and now is the third fastest seed in the race. And it's sort of that Olympic year, jump in fitness. That's the sort of person who often can make the team, even though if most people might say, "Who is Julia Lucas?" She could do something in the trials.
And you're referring to that 15:08 she ran at Stanford, which was very impressive. And before we wrap up here, for the listener just tuning in, we're talking to senior editor Scott Douglas of Running Times for our segment of Around the Clock. We're talking about the Olympic trials. And Scott, I'm going to ask you one last question before we wrap up. Where can people get a hold of the Running Times?
We're in a lot of bookstores, but the best thing to do would just be to go to runningtimes.com, and right on the homepage you'll see a thing to click on to get a subscription, and I think it's only like $10 for a year.
Well worth it. Running Times is the best.
Everyone, all the hosts here on the Runaround do check it out at the very least on the Running Times. Whether or not we get a chance to pick it up every month, we'll make sure that we do that from now on. Scott, we enjoyed
to my house.
Right, we enjoyed having you on the show. Once again, Running Times, the magazine for the dedicated runner. And Scott, thanks for joining us on Around the Clock today. We'll be talking to you next month, my friend.
Okay, bye-bye.
All right, pretty cool. That guy knows some running, man. I'm telling you. There's people who know running. Scott's one of them. But anyway, coming up soon, more of the Runaround. Everything you need. Stay tuned.
Right.